Welcome back, you filthy exiles, and I guess newcomers from Diablo 4, which seems to be the trend these days. So, I guess I thought I'd preface this video of, obviously we're coming into the 3.22 League. I have a heap of videos planned that are coming out, but I was like, I'll put a video together that will run new players through, and maybe even some existing players through, some of the resources that we use in Path of Exile to achieve trading, builds, and all that sort of rigmarole. And it can be a bit daunting when you first look at it, but this sort of gives you a good idea of the tools that we use to get the best outcomes, and also to figure out what people are playing and everything else in between. So we're going to go through 5 different tools today, websites, tools, whatever. All these are TOS approved or TOS permitted through Path of Exile and the devs and whatnot, and the game developers, so GGG, Groaning Gear Games. Which means that they are perfectly fine to use. They're within the rules and confines of the game, including the trade macro. It generally, for anything that you do look at, just remember one click to one function is the overall methodology that we've been communicated to. But these are safe to use, and even included one that is made by Path of Exile devs themselves, which is the trade website. But anyway, let's get into 5 tools or resources that you can use to amplify your PoE experience. In particular, if you're coming from a different game, D4, and decided that you want to give PoE a whack for the 3.22 League. Okay, so the first resource that you're going to see used a lot in Path of Exile, in particular I use it a lot and everybody else does, and my nose always goes off while I'm recording, is POE.Ninja. Now what is this? So for those who aren't so accustomed to PoE, when you play Trade League, which is the standard league for any league, so there's obviously currency exchange and things like that, which obviously we have currency tabs here. We can see what everything is valued at. But the base underlying currency that values all things, basically you can look at it as gold, is chaos. And greater than chaos is divine orbs, and then greater than that is mirrors. That's our 3 categories of how we value things. We can see Divine's currently in the 3.21 League, as it's sort of winding out, as 193 Chaos. And this governs basically how we trade. So we trade in Chaos, we trade in Divine, it used to be Exalts, now it's Divine Orbs, and the outcome of that is how we trade. So what POE.Ninja does is it gives you a bit of a big open resource of all these different currencies, what they're worth, and it gives you a bit of an idea of how the market works. And if we look at, for example, Divine Orbs, which is a great example, pardon me, one of the best things that you can see is how the trade history works from the start of leagues. And it's basically like an economy market. Well, it is its own economy, which is why Path of Exile is so significantly different to most other games, because it has this internal currency trading monologue. Now, is it similar to like World of Warcraft? More or less, but with its own differences. This is one of the reasons why games like Diablo don't really have that longevity, because it doesn't have an active trade market. If you're coming from Diablo, this is a very different thing to get used to. But what this also means is getting access to the builds that you want to play becomes exponentially easier, and we'll talk about that very shortly. Now, talking about builds that you might want to play, this also includes builds. So however they do it, they manage to collate enough player statistics that they can gather information from day one through to the end of the league right now, and then they archive the resources, and you can generally see the player base that are playing. You can see the items they're using and the percentage breakdown of the items they're using. This was on day 1 of this league. And the skills they're using. Lightning Arrow was really popular, which is not going to happen because Vengeance Cascade's probably going to get nerfed to oblivion this league. But yeah, if you don't want to follow a build guide, like the ones that I'll put up or the many other guides that creators would put up, this is a really good resource that would allow you to basically just rip a tree from somebody randomly. Let's just go, this first guy here. You can see the items they're playing, all that sort of jazz. It'll give you an idea of the tree, it'll give you the skill breakdowns. You can even get the path of building here, and we'll talk about path of building next, and this will segue into this, so let's keep this one on the screen and talk about that next. Outside of this, if you've got a streamer that you really like, you can, go into the streamers tab and have a look at that. And that's basically the function. Now, obviously, I'm a Delve aficionado. So when I use Path of Building, when I use POE.Ninja, I'm looking at things like Delve currencies or resonators. How are they selling right now in League? They went down in price. That's disappointing, but also it's the end of League, so yeah. And we can also see the League trends. So I use this to look at the trends. So we can see the price went up through the League, probably because I put so many Delve videos up. But this is how we track the price to see if currencies are worth it. And then obviously patch notes and things like that dictate the outcomes that we go to. But, you know, you can trade fragments, you can trade artifacts, which are, you know, these are from the expedition content that drops in the game, which is getting a pretty good buff from what I can see from the keystones, unless they buff the actual mechanic. They nerf the mechanic itself. Oils from Blight, incubators, you name it. This site tells you everything you need to know. And this is a good baseline to understand like how currency works, how things trade. And, you know, for the most, you may never see like a tainted divine orb in your entire gameplay of the game, early on at least. But, you know, this gives you an idea. And blessings are high up because breach is a lot more difficult to farm in volume now. Anyway, this website's a fantastic resource if you're getting started and you're trying to understand how the currency market works. Definitely worth having a look at, and at least having a look at the different builds that people play. If you're going to play your own build because you want to do that, I'm going to do this myself thing, then get some ideas from here. It generally gives you a really good breakdown of how the builds work, the support skills to use, and all that sort of jazz. Because there's hundreds of thousands of players playing, and this website collects the data so that we can see how it all works. Anyway, let's talk about how you would take a build, and in this case, we'll use this one here because I pulled out the other thing, and how Path of Building works. So the starting point is, let's talk about Path of Building. Okay, so inevitably you would have run across this behemoth of a skill tree system in Path of Exile, whether you just load the game up or if you know, look at Path of Building already or whatever. Anyway, this is very intimidating for especially new players, and there's no like easy way to ease your way into this. The best way, the recommendation I always give people is pick up a guide and follow the guide. And maybe pick RF from Pox, somebody who's explained things really well. I put a heap of League starters out. I'll be putting a Detonate Dead League starter out that'll explain this in depth. Just follow something to give you an idea. You could wing it. Winging it will work, but also winging it will result in you having a bad time. Potentially. It depends on whether you want to get to that end game really quickly, or if you're happy to trial and error. Like, it depends on the player a lot, right? Now, this versus what's in Diablo 4. Diablo 4 isn't really a skill tree system. It's what I would call a fake skill tree system, designed to give you the idea that a skill tree exists there. But this is actually a skill tree, right? And other games do this. Like, you know, Last Epoch has a different take on this. Pardon me. Walson has somewhat of a different system, but it has like 3 big rings where you look at it and whatever. Anyway, we're not talking about the skill tree system today. That's another video in itself because it's a behemoth. We're talking about Path of Building. So one way to sort of test the builds that you want to play before you get into League to see if there could be viability or whatever, we call it theory crafting. In our particular sort of take on it from a creator's side. Otherwise, it's just called, you know, tinkering with Path of Building. Now, what this does, it allows you to pull in resources or character details that you can actually punch in here, have a look at the damage, have a look at the defense, and see whether a build's somewhat viable or if it's complete bullshit. Now, I'll preface this. This is not an absolute system. Like, this is not going to tell you, okay, it gives me 100 million DPS, I'm absolutely going to do well. There are other elements of PoE that you need to bear in mind. Playstyle, type of content, type of build, defensive stats, you know, efficiency of build, speed, things like that. There's so many factors that go into learning the game. Mechanics, that this will not give you a one-stop shop of this build will cheese the entire game. It's more than often the case that, in particular for my content, right? So my builds are very heavily geared towards tanking through Delve. They're not so good at taking down like Ubers, for example. And most of the time they're not made for Ubers. And then you've got Uber builds that struggle in maps, struggle in everything, But Ice Trap Uber killers can one-shot or tag bosses in 2 seconds and drop an Uber with a few hits. But they're very much not good at anything else. Then there are all-arounder builds that can play everything, not amazingly in any direction, but they can play everything. As long as you've got the skill set that will allow you to do it. Then there are just other builds that, you know, people blast maps with and they don't have any tanky content. There might be magic find builds. Anyway, this just gives you an idea of how they'll play, or an idea of what their stats will come out to, but it can never realistically fully tell you how a build will play. You won't know that until you actually try, which is why this might even say things will be bad, but you play a build and it's a lot better than what it looks like on paper, because things can be distorted in here, and unfortunately people get jaded behind path of building, and that sometimes dictates entirely how they play the game. Anyway, where do you get this program from? So there were originally 2 path of buildings that came out years ago. The one that you actually want is called Community Fork. The reason why is there was an original path of building. It, for whatever reason, never got updated. I can't remember what the history of it was, or it was done by someone at GGG. Anyway, that was thrown into the wayside and the community took it over, and then ever since the community has managed and maintained path of building into the form that it is now. So you're looking for path of building community fork, basically, or the link in the description. One good way to indicate whether it's the right one is just having a look at the update stats on the path of building. So this one is the right one as far as I can see. Anyway. So yeah, you download this, you install it, okay, cool, and you open up path building and you're like, okay, what the fuck do I do with this program? It is ridiculous. Well, it's a few simple things. So number one, you could just start tinkering with a build and you click in, you select the type of build, the level, whatever. You could do that, right? Nothing to stop you from doing that. Or you can take a existing tree and import it. Now, for characters that have got their ID set to open, you can import characters, i.e. you just punch in the character or player name, like your favorite streamers or whatever, get the character name, punch it in, start, and it will pull it in, and all my characters will come up, and it's a really intuitive program for that, considering, it's crazy. And then I could have a look at all my standard characters, which I have a few because I've been playing this game for a long time, or any of my normal characters. And then I'll just hit import passive tree, import items and skills, Bob's your uncle, close. However, if you're going to like a YouTube video, or you're going to like path of building or whatever, POE.Ninja, you would more or less look at this import code for path of building, because everything is designed around the ecosystem of all these programs. So you would go back in here, copy this, and then go into your path of building, and then you're just going to import it into here. I was at right click because it automatically pastes, and then we go import, and hey, everything's in here. And then when you just click around to the right skills, I don't even know what skill I ticked on. I think it's explode totems, most likely, because that was really popular. And it'll give you everything you need to know, clusters and everything. Now, one thing to bear in mind when you are looking at build guides that are using path of buildings is configuration. Always make sure that is the enemy a boss is ticked on to Guardian or Pinnacle. If it's not ticked on to Guardian or Pinnacle, then their tree's bullshit and it's just not legit. Now, in my guides, I always go through this configuration screen because this tells you how to configure your path of building. There are different stats that have different sort of ratings. Shock will change how builds work and all that sort of jazz. And then the biggest check though is if a build doesn't have this ticked on, just scrub the video. Don't even look at it any further, because if they haven't ticked it on, they haven't really calibrated the build properly and they haven't thought about it. Now, this will happen predominantly with newer creators that are more inexperienced. They'll go punch a build in the POB, it'll say 10 million DPS, and then once you chuck this in, it'll go down to 5 million or 2 million DPS, and it's completely misleading. Sometimes it's not because it's their fault, they just don't know any better, or they're just making new videos. Definitely I made this mistake when I was first making videos a long time ago, but it's just something to be aware of when you're checking POBs. Now, generally when you import them from POE.Ninja, they're relatively fine. If you're importing them from a streamer, it might be in stream, just bear this in mind, make sure this is ticked on. But you'll also have to work through all of this. Now, I'll do a video eventually about how to work through these config screens because it's taken me years to figure it out. And I'm still not perfect at it either. Other things to bear in mind, POB will distort if you've got like Val aura skills, so like Val haste and stuff like that. So make sure stuff like that's ticked off. And the way that you do that is you just click in here and then disable the skill, and then it doesn't affect. Melee builds in particular with the Chieftain in this league, just check for things like Berserk is ticked off. If Berserk is on, you don't have 100% uptime on Berserk, so it's completely unrealistic as well. Anyway, this is basically how you use Path of Building. It's a really, really cool app. There'll be a link in the description to it. Pretty much we all use this across the board in Path of Exile. It's the easiest way to check builds. The other thing too is if you are new and you're getting into creating builds, you could generate a Path of Building, a POE.Ninja, which is what I usually do now for Mac users or console users, or a paste bin, which is used for Path of Building. But this program is fantastic. Now, I don't use things like Party. You can do all of this now. They're adding it in. There's some other really cool tools. We've got calc screens in here. If you're a real sort of numbers sort of mogul, you could go through and like really like look at how everything breaks everything down. And this will actually tell you the sources, the gear, where everything's coming from. So like totem life mods are coming from a few different places. Car speeds, all that sort of jazz. It'll tell you your resource usage. It'll tell you, you know, your reserved and unreserved mana. And in this case, there's probably an aura that, yeah, Val Arctic Armor, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. So you would have enabled Arctic Armor, or you would have it disabled, and then, yeah, so on, so on. But that's how this works. So that's the second thing that I put here is a really cool tool that you could use to really amp up your game experience, especially if you're a newer player. Now, do you need to use this? No, you don't need to use this. You could get away without using this. This really makes PoE a lot easier when you get more experienced in the game, and I would recommend getting your head around how the system works. And if you want to see another video on how all of this works, then put a comment in the description and I'll do a video on it before league. But yeah, anyway, let's go into the third resource that you could use if you're a newer player. Okay, so now we're in the game, and this one's really important. The third thing I'm going to talk about is loot filters. So when you first load into the game, and usually I think it was under, where are we? UI. There's a lot of settings in here. No, game. All right. So when you first load into the game, it'll be the default loot filter, and it's not that great. So if we go none, we'll just sort of kill something, and you'll see what I mean. So it just sort of comes up and it clutters your screen like absolute trash, right? And that's not great, because when you're fighting higher tier shit, when you've got constant drops all over the screen, it's really hard to click shit. So we use loot filters, and you have a bunch of different types of loot filters you can use. You can look up and you can find ones that are to your preference. You can even create loot filters. I won't go into that this video, but I'll give you two examples of the ones that I use. So I always use never sync filters. And the way that you do it is you'll go to, and we can see straight away the effect of the filter. So we can have it level. Leveling doesn't work anymore. We can have it soft, regular. The other thing that the filter will do will allow you to find particular items, like, you know, items that have 3 differently colored sockets that you can get chrome orbs from early on, which is really useful. Now, it's the first thing I install at the start of every league, and generally every filter creator has one, and they update it at the start of every league. But it's almost like a, you really need it to progress, you know, because as you play these higher up levels, so, you know, you can generally go to strict, and that means you'll only see like really good drops that drop on the ground, and or currency items like, you know, portal scrolls, which we tend to run out of all the time. So you don't get all that screen clutter. Whereas like if I take this on the regular, then I'll start getting drops. And then if I go back to semi-strict, yeah, I'll still do it. Some of the other things that will happen with different loot filters, they have different sounds, but different loot filters will work differently and they'll have different outlines. Now, the loot filter that I use, always, whenever I start playing this build, by the way, this is my, this will be the build that I'm running for league start. So as you can see, it's pretty good depending on the patch notes. But anyway, let's get let's get back into the menu screen, and I'll show you what I mean. So there's 2 loot filters that I use, or that I would recommend initially. So I use never sync every league. Never sync, never had any problems. One of the best loot filters ever. I'll put a link in the description to the never sync filter, which you can see on the screen here. The other filter that I would recommend is filter blade. And see, you can actually calibrate filter blades as well, and you can sort of rejig it, and it'll show you how things will look when different things... Oh, the butcher's axe, there we go, that's pretty cool. It'll show you how everything looks as it drops, and if you like it, go for it. There are ways to tailor this further as well based on your settings, but filter blade's another really good example for loot filters that you could use. So the two that I would recommend, Neversink and oh, actually we've got Neversink here. Filter blade's just a website, so it's Neversink anyway. So yeah, Neversink is pretty much the go-to filter that I would recommend using. There are a ton of other ones that you can get, but it's up to you at the end of the day. Have a Google around, but as long as you're aware of it, you know, you're all Gucci. And then when you go into the game, you pretty much just load into the league. And the game's so intuitive these days that it knows that you'll get a filter straight away. So you go in a game and you can actually open up the filter folder, download the filter, copy and paste the files in, and then just reload the filter and it'll load the filter up for you. And that's basically loot filters. It's really, really easy. So let's talk about trading in Path of Exile next. Okay, so the next two things are probably two of the most important things you need to know about the game if you're going to play a trade league. So Path of Exile is very trade-centric, so it's very, very sort of geared towards getting the items that you need to be able to do whatever you need to do earlier on. So if we look at for example, the item that I'll need when I league start will be the Black Flame. So Black Flame Ring. If you're looking at your build guide and Path of Building, you go, I need a Black Flame. Bam, there you go. And so this, you'll need to link your account into here. This will automatically send a, I won't do this because this will annoy the dude. This will automatically send a direct message to whoever that is in the game, and they'll be able to see it now. If we go direct, we'll just do it anyway. We can see from this, a bit of a dick move on my point, but yeah, anyway. Then you can process the trade, do whatever you need to do. Now, usually I was pretty confident that this guy wasn't pick up because the first person you trade with generally doesn't pick up at the end of a league. Anyway, so that's basically how you would do trading. So you just punch it in, search, whatever. Now there's more complex things that you can trade for, and maybe a video for another day. If you're looking at buying currency, so if you need to buy divine orbs for whatever reason, you go, yes, I want a divine orb, pardon me, and I'm going to trade with chaos orbs to get that divine orb. And see, this will come up, and then you can select how many div you want to buy. And so you go contact, and then you go direct whisper, and then pull the slider across, and Bob's your uncle. Now, this is how we do trading in Path of Exile. We don't have like an auction house or anything like that in Path of Exile. This is how trading is done. Now, if you're at the start of league and you're like, oh, I need a 6-link piece of armor, you would go armor, so body armor, and then if you need like 2 red, 2 green, 2 blue, you'd punch that in here and go search. Bam, and there we go, 4 chaos. These are pretty cheap usually. If the other one's tabula rasa, you need that potentially on early league starts. Bam, 5 chaos. Usually it's like 17 to 40 chaos initially. As you can see, people trade to me as well, and so I could then, you know, invite to party. This is actually a really good example to sell some shutterings. So what do you need? 10 shutterings he had? Yep. So then he'll come to my hideout, which will be in a couple of seconds. Come on, man. There we go. Bam. So you go trade. Bam. He'll trade his chaos with you. 40 chaos. Done. Easy. Alright, and then we just leave the party. Now that's how trading works, you know, all the time. Now, if you're looking to do what I did there and put something up on the market as opposed to trading yourself, then you would go to your stash tabs. Let's take a fresh tab. Let's just go gems tab, whatever. We'll just pull it to the top. All right. So we got the gems tab here, right? And then we would go make it a public tab, and then we go set negotiable price, set exact price. So you could set like 2C items, so you would have it, you know, everything could be 2C in this tab. Or alternatively, you just make it each item and have that set to whatever. And so I would drag my map into this tab, and then I would right click on the item, exact price, let's put it up for like 15 chaos. And that's how you would sell. It's now priced for 15 chaos. This will then update to the path of the POE Trade website, which I'll put a link in the description to, and Bob's your uncle. And that's basically trading. That's really simple breakdown of how trading works in the game. Hopefully that explains. If you got questions, put it in the description below. But that's how trading works. Now, can you do this with non-premium tabs? Absolutely. You just need to make them public. It's really easy. Now, affinities and whatnot, that determines the default tab where you would, for example, have your currency going. So if I selected this for currency, then when I just like click, when I control click, it'll automatically filter that into that tab there. Usually I have this set as my currency tab because this is a currency tab where it stacks up, but we're not going to talk about tabs today. That's how to trade. That's how to trade or buy items on the market and sell items on the market. But how do you know what the price is? Let's talk about that one next. Okay, so this is a program that you are permitted to use in Path of Exile. So for anyone that's like, are you allowed to use this program? Yes, you can. Everybody fucking uses this program. It's really good. So it's called Awaken Trade. What does it do? Well, it's a trade macro program. Now, PoE is one of those rare games that it has permissible trade macros like this because of the way the trading's dealt with. It's held out externally out of the game. So we have a macro that allows us to price check stuff when we're in game because of how the API works. So if we're in a game, you're doing some farming, say you have like this Brutus lead sprinkler drops, right? You pick it up, okay? How do I know what I'm going to trade? How do I know how I'm going to trade for, you know, that particular item? Like what's the price? You know, well, there's an easy way to find out. Okay, so I thought I'd switch the item out so we could see a bit better use of POE Trade than the one that I was about to show with the Brutus. So if I was about to find the price of this or figure out how much this would cost, I would hover over the top of it, I would hit Control D, and it'll give me the price of what the market is. So if you've got Control still held down, so it'll give you a bit of a market price, it'll give you a bit of an idea of the movement, and also what other people are selling it for as well. As you can see, I'm getting spammed as well by POE Trade. And that's basically how we trade. Now, is this perfect? No, not always. And sometimes you'll need to tailor the roles. So cast speed, different things like that, we can tick that. It'll change the parameters that it searches by. But this is probably best guesstimate of how to get prices in PoE at a sort of reasonable level while you're playing the game. And then you would just chuck it in your stash tab, you know, put it in for 4C, and then just wait for someone to purchase it, basically. And that's how Awaken POE Trade works. And I guess that feeds back into how trading works as well. Anyway, that's pretty much it for trading. Okay, so I hope this video sort of gives you a good sort of idea of these different resources we have in Path of Exile. It's very different to other games. PoE is a very robust game. It just has so much going on. A lot of these tools are community driven, and the developers allow the community to do this sort of stuff because it drives the player base. And some people have different goals in the game. Some people's entire goal is to stack up as much divine as they possibly can and look at that number and get off over that. Like, that's how crazy the end game can be in PoE. That's not my end game, but other people, definitely, it's their thing. But yeah, anyway, if you've got any questions, hit me up in the description below. You know, always happy to have open discussion in the comments. And yeah, anyway, until next time, if you're looking at coming from D4 to PoE, these are some things that will give you a bit of a leg up. And yeah, stay filthy all, and bye.